Buckle up, because we're diving into the National Democratic Congress's 2024 Manifesto for Ghana.
Yeah.
And wow, they're calling for a complete reset.
No kidding. They really don't mince words, do they?
Not at all.
Yeah.
After going through their proposals, it's clear they see this election as a make-or-break moment for Ghana.
It's true. The NDC's portrayal of Ghana's current situation is pretty stark. Just take the opening message from their national chairman, Johnson Asidu in Kataya.
Right.
He doesn't just talk about economic hardship. He uses phrases like ignoble degeneration and even warns of a potential societal breakdown if things don't change.
Yeah, he doesn't sugarcoat it. They even get into some pretty hard-hitting examples to back up their point.
Oh, absolutely.
Like the pensioners, for example.
Right.
These are people who've worked their whole lives, and now they have to picket just to access their hard-earned savings. It's a powerful image.
It really highlights the stakes that the NDC sees for this election. Either total economic and social collapse or a complete reset.
And that's where the manifesto comes in, right? It's all about this reset they keep talking about.
Exactly. Chapter 1 kicks off with their proposed economic overhaul. It's like their master plan for getting Ghana back on track.
Okay, so what's the first order of business? Where do they even begin to address these problems?
Well, they pinpoint what they call the 3 major crises that are plaguing Ghana. Sky-high unemployment, inflation making everyday goods unaffordable, and a mountain of public debt.
Yeah, those are some pretty significant challenges, to say the least.
They claim that the current administration has actually quadrupled the debt from 120 billion GHS in 2016 to over 742 billion GHS today.
Wow, that's a staggering increase.
It really highlights the scale of the economic challenges that they're claiming to inherit.
So it's like they're inheriting a sinking ship. How do they plan to tackle these issues? What's their approach?
They have a 2-pronged strategy. First, restoring fiscal responsibility, which basically means getting government spending under control.
Okay, makes sense. What's the second?
Second is rebuilding trust in Ghana's financial systems, which is where the restructuring of the Bank of Ghana comes in.
Okay, so restructuring the Bank of Ghana. What does that actually mean? What are they changing?
It's a good question. They argue that the Bank of Ghana lacks independence, which prevents it from effectively controlling inflation and regulating the financial sector.
Interesting.
So to address that, they're proposing changes to its governing structure to make it more autonomous, essentially less susceptible to political interference. They also want to increase its regulatory oversight.
So more transparency and accountability from the Bank of Ghana.
Precisely. And this focus on transparency isn't limited to just the bank. It extends to their overall fiscal policy. They're proposing a fiscal consolidation plan.
Okay, sounds pretty official.
It sounds much more complicated than it is. It's a roadmap for reducing government spending and reining in that national debt we talked about.
Okay, so like a plan to fix the economy.
Exactly. To make sure they stick to this plan, they want to create an independent fiscal council. It would be a group of experts who would provide oversight and make sure the government is being fiscally responsible.
It almost sounds like they're trying to build in safeguards to prevent the same economic issues from happening again.
That's a good way to put it. They're trying to address what they see as past mismanagement.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But even if they stabilize the economy, how are they going to tackle the issue of creating jobs? After all, jobs for all is one of their big slogans.
That's where their most ambitious and, let's be honest, potentially radical proposal comes in, the 24-hour economy.
This is the one outlined in Chapter 2, right? The 24-hour economy? It's certainly a catchy name, but I have to admit it has me both curious and a little terrified.
It's definitely an attention grabber.
What exactly are they proposing? Are they talking about all businesses operating around the clock? Or is it more strategic than that?
They're not suggesting that the entire country never sleeps. It's about key sectors. The 24-hour model would target specific sectors with high growth potential. We're talking manufacturing, agro-processing, pharmaceuticals, even some areas of healthcare.
Okay, I can see how that would increase production and boost exports.
Yeah.
But practically speaking, how do you even begin to implement something like that? It's a lot to wrap your head around a nation running on a 24-hour clock. But before we get ahead of ourselves with the how of it all, let's step back for a second. They can't have a 24-hour economy without a solid foundation.
You're hitting on a key point.
Yeah.
The NDC knows they can't build a house on a shaky foundation. That's why Chapter 3 of the Manifesto dives into their plans for 2 of Ghana's most important industries, agriculture and manufacturing.
This is all part of their plan with the catchy name, right?
Yes, the Ghana Framework for Industrialization, Revitalization, Support, and Transformation. or Ghana First for short. It's a mouthful.
Ghana first. I like it. It's catchy. But what does it actually mean in terms of concrete plans?
It boils down to a two-pronged approach.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
First, they want to revitalize struggling industries, breathe new life into sectors that have been facing challenges.
Revitalization, got it. What's the second prong?
Second, they want to foster the growth of new industries. They envision a more diversified and resilient economy for Ghana.
So they've identified the what, but what about the how? What are the actual plans to achieve these goals?
Let's start with agriculture. Feed Ghana is one of their flagship programs.
Feed Ghana. I like the sound of that already. Tell me more.
It aims to achieve food security while also transforming Ghana into a major player in the global food processing industry. It's about more than just feeding themselves.
This reminds me of something we discussed earlier, adding value within Ghana. Like with cocoa, right? Instead of just exporting the raw beans, they want to process them domestically.
You've hit the nail on the head. They're talking about becoming a hub for cocoa processing. Imagine factories popping up in cocoa-growing regions, turning beans into finished chocolate, cocoa powder, and all sorts of value-added products.
Creating jobs and keeping more of the profits within Ghana. Sounds like a win-win to me.
Exactly. It has the potential to generate more revenue and create a ripple effect of job creation across multiple sectors.
But becoming a cocoa processing powerhouse is no easy feat.
Right.
What makes the NDC think they can pull it off?
They've laid out a multifaceted approach. For starters, they plan to invest heavily in research and development, particularly in developing new cocoa varieties, ones that are more resistant to things like disease and climate change.
So making sure Ghana's cocoa industry is ready for the future.
Exactly. They also want to provide training and support to cocoa farmers, equipping them with the skills to improve their yields and the quality of their beans.
Investing in the people on the ground. Smart move.
And here's the really interesting part. They're even proposing a cocoa college.
A whole college dedicated to cocoa. Now that's commitment.
It really highlights how serious they are about this. But it's not just about cocoa. This focus on adding value extends to other agricultural products too. They talk about revitalizing the tomato processing industry, for example.
Where does that fit in?
They're looking at areas like Pulugu and the Bono region where tomatoes are already a major crop. It's about identifying existing strengths and building on them.
Makes sense. So they've got agriculture covered. What about their plans for the manufacturing sector?
They're looking at reviving old industries and supporting the growth of new ones. For example, they want to revitalize the textile industry.
That's an industry that's faced its fair share of challenges.
Absolutely. They specifically talk about investing in factories like Jolpong Textiles and ATL in Akosombo with the goal of modernizing their operations and making them more competitive globally.
Breathing new life into industries that were once the backbone of Ghana's economy.
Exactly. But they're also looking to the future. They talk about supporting new factories for brewing local beers.
Now that's an industry I can get behind. Supporting local businesses and enjoying a good drink. It's a win-win.
They recognize the growing demand for craft beers and other locally produced beverages. But let's be real for a moment. A lot of these plans, they hinge on having the right infrastructure in place. And on top of that, they're also emphasizing green initiatives.
Can they really pull off this industrial growth while also prioritizing environmental sustainability?
It's a balancing act, no question. The manifesto acknowledges this, and they emphasize things like sustainable mining practices, especially given the issues with illegal mining, like Galamsey. They're not advocating for growth at all costs.
So they're trying to find that sweet spot between economic development and environmental protection.
They also talk about reforestation efforts to combat deforestation, the Blue Water Initiative, to rehabilitate areas degraded by mining.
It's ambitious, but it seems like they're trying to thread the needle here, trying to make sure these benefits reach all Ghanaians.
That's the key, right? They're trying to create a more prosperous and equitable Ghana, one built on strong industries, sustainable practices, and a workforce ready for what's next.
Speaking of a workforce equipped for the future, let's talk about their plans for investing in people. Education, healthcare, social programs, all essential for a thriving society.
Absolutely, and that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive.
A strong economy and thriving industries are great, but it's all for nothing if they don't invest in the people, right?
You're absolutely right. That's where Chapter 5 of their manifesto comes in. Investing in people for inclusive growth.
Okay, so they're not just talking about numbers and economic indicator.
Not at all. This is about creating a more equitable and just society one where everyone has a real shot at success.
Right, so let's break it down. They start with education, which seems pretty essential for any party hoping to lead Ghana into the future.
Absolutely.
What were some of the key proposals that jumped out at you?
Well, one of the most eye-catching is their no-fee stress policy for tertiary education.
No fee stress catchy. What's that all about?
They're proposing to completely abolish academic fees for all first-year students in public universities and colleges.
Wow, free tertiary education for first-year students. That's a pretty big deal. But what about students who are already enrolled? What happens to them?
They've got a plan for that, too. For continuing students, they're planning to revamp the Student Loan Trust Fund to make it more accessible and less burdensome.
So easier to get a loan and easier to pay it back.
Exactly. The goal is to make it easier for students to complete their education without being crushed by debt after they graduate.
Makes sense. But while we're talking about making education accessible, what about people who face additional barriers, like people with disabilities?
They address that as well. They've committed to providing free tertiary education for all persons with disabilities.
So removing those financial barriers to higher education.
Recognizing that finances should never be the thing holding someone back.
I like it. It sounds like they're really trying to level the playing field. But what about the quality of education itself? Are they just focused on making it cheaper? Or are they talking about improving standards too? Getting students ready for the jobs of the future?
Oh, they definitely have an overlooked quality. They have a whole section in the manifesto on curriculum reform. At the basic education level, for example, they plan to introduce what they're calling a Smart Start curriculum.
Smart Start. Love a good name. What's that all about?
Imagine young children in Ghana learning about STEM, coding, and digital literacy from a young age.
That's awesome. Getting them ready for a tech-driven world? What about secondary education? Any interesting plans there?
They have a lot of ideas. For one, they want to abolish the double-track system.
Which has been a bit controversial, to say the least.
Say the least. They also want to introduce specialized AI labs in selected secondary schools.
Hold on. AI labs in secondary schools, that's next level.
It shows how serious they are about equipping students with the skills they need in a rapidly changing world.
It's really impressive. But it's not all about high tech. What about things like vocational training? Is there a place for that in the NDC's vision?
Absolutely. They plan to invest heavily in TVET, technical and vocational education and training.
So recognizing that not everyone needs a university degree.
Exactly. They want to establish regional centers of excellence and promote the recognition of prior learning, especially for skilled artisans who might not have formal qualifications.
Okay, so that makes sense. Honoring those practical skills. All right, we've talked education, but we can't forget about another crucial element, healthcare.
It's another major focus for the NDC.
So what are their priorities when it comes to healthcare?
They talk about strengthening primary healthcare, expanding access to specialized services, and crucially, making healthcare more affordable for everyone.
Okay, so those are big goals. How do they actually plan to make that happen?
One of their big proposals is establishing a medical care trust fund.
A medical care trust fund. What's the thinking behind that?
It's specifically designed to provide financial support for people with chronic diseases. They recognize that managing conditions like diabetes or heart disease can be incredibly expensive.
Right, so this fund would help alleviate those costs.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that people can access the care they need without going bankrupt.
It sounds like a step toward recognizing healthcare as a right, not a privilege. Now, are there any specific healthcare initiatives that stand out?
They talk about expanding basic healthcare services, particularly in rural and underserved communities.
Okay, and how are they going to reach those communities?
They want to establish clinics in places like markets and transport stations, bringing healthcare directly to where people are.
Meeting people where they are smart. Anything else?
They also plan to bring back mobile medical and dental services.
Reaching those who might not have regular access to healthcare facilities. Okay, that all sounds really promising. But good education and healthcare, as important as they are only part of the picture. What about social inclusion and equality?
They dedicate a large portion of their manifesto to those issues.
Like what specifically?
Empowering women, supporting people with disabilities, addressing the needs of marginalized communities. It's all in there.
So let's start with gender equality. What are some of their key proposals?
They've put forward several concrete initiatives aimed at empowering women, both economically and socially. For instance, they plan to create a women's development bank.
A bank specifically for women, how would that work?
It's designed to address the specific challenges women often face when trying to access financial services.
Right, because sadly, those challenges do exist. What else are they proposing?
They're launching a Women in Agriculture initiative.
Recognizing the vital role women play in agriculture.
They want to make sure women have the resources and support they need to succeed.
That's fantastic. But economic empowerment is only part of the equation. What about addressing issues like gender-based violence?
They address those issues head-on. They're committed to tackling gender-based violence by strengthening support systems for survivors.
Like what? What kind of support?
Things like establishing more shelters and implementing tougher penalties for perpetrators. They also plan to ratify the ILO Convention on Eliminating Violence and Harassment in the Workplace.
So, creating a safer and more respectful environment for everyone. That's a really important step.
Okay, so they've got plans for gender equality. What about support for persons with disabilities?
They have a very detailed plan for promoting disability inclusion.
Okay, like what?
They want to strengthen the legal framework protecting the rights of persons with disabilities. They also propose a minimum hiring quota for persons with disabilities in both the public and private sectors.
So making sure workplaces are truly inclusive.
Exactly. And they plan to increase a percentage of the District Assembly's Common Fund allocated to disability support.
Providing more resources at the local level.
And of course, they talk about making public infrastructure more accessible.
It sounds like they're really trying to think about all aspects of creating a truly inclusive society. But here's the thing. All of these ambitious plans hinge on one crucial factor: good governance.
Couldn't agree more.
Because even with the best ideas in the world, what good are they if the government isn't equipped to implement them effectively and transparently? It's all connected.
So let's wrap up our deep dive by looking at the NDC's proposals for good governance and fighting corruption. They outline all of this in Chapter 6 of their manifesto.
And they're very clear that restoring trust in government and tackling corruption are top priorities.
Well, they certainly don't hold back when it comes to criticizing the current administration. They're claiming the current government has really eroded democratic norms and undermined institutions.
They're very critical of the current government's track record on these issues.
Do they give any specific examples?
They point to things like the removal of the Electoral Commission chairperson and her deputies,
Right.
and also the dismissal of the Auditor General. They see these as evidence of a worrying pattern of interference and disregard for the rule of law.
Okay, so they've made their stance clear. But how would they do things differently? What are their actual plans for cleaning up government and ensuring accountability?
Well, one of their boldest proposals is to reduce the size of government.
Okay, so leaner, more efficient government.
Exactly. They argue that this is essential for effective service delivery.
Makes sense. What else?
They've also promised to get rid of ex gratia payments to Article 71 office holders.
Hold on a second. For those of us who aren't experts in Ghanaian politics, what exactly are Article 71 office holders?
Sure, it's a mouthful. It refers to a specific group of public officials outlined in Article 71 of Ghana's constitution. We're talking about the president, vice president, ministers of state, members of parliament, basically the folks at the top.
The bigwigs.
Exactly.
Okay, so by scrapping these ex gratia payments, the NDC is saying they want to do away with these extra perks for politicians.
They see it as a culture of entitlement that needs to end.
It's a bold move, for sure.
And they're not stopping there. They also plan to establish an independent emoluments commission.
And what would that commission do?
They would be responsible for determining the salaries and benefits of those Article 71 office holders.
So, taking that power away from the politicians themselves.
Precisely. Trying to avoid any conflicts of interest.
Interesting approach. But it's one thing to change the rules. What about tackling actual corruption?
They outline a multi-pronged approach to that as well. They want to strengthen institutions like the Auditor General, the EOCO, the EOCO, the Economic and Organized Crime Office, giving them more power to investigate and prosecute cases of financial mismanagement.
So giving these watchdog institutions more teeth.
Exactly. And they want to empower the Financial Intelligence Center, the FIC, making sure they have the resources to do their jobs effectively.
It definitely sounds like they're serious about tackling this issue. But what about the justice system itself? Is there anything about judicial reforms in the manifesto?
There is. They have a whole section dedicated to it. They talk about expanding access to legal aid, promoting alternative dispute resolution mechanisms.
So making the justice system more accessible and efficient.
Yes. They even talk about establishing new courts in underserved regions,
Ensuring that everyone has access to justice.
regardless of where they live or their economic status.
Okay, that makes sense. It sounds like they're really trying to build a fairer system. Now, before we wrap things up, we have to remember that Ghana exists in a global context.
It's all connected.
So let's talk briefly about the NDC's vision for Ghana's place on the world stage. This is all outlined in Chapter 7, right?
That's right, Chapter 7, their foreign policy agenda. They frame it around the concept of economic diplomacy.
Okay, break that down for me. What does economic diplomacy actually mean in practice?
It means recognizing that economic strength and strategic partnerships are essential for national security and prosperity. They want to strengthen ties with traditional partners like the US, the UK, the EU.
The usual suspects.
Exactly. But they also want to forge new alliances with emerging economies like China, India, and Brazil.
So not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And they emphasize the importance of regional integration, especially within the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the FCFTA.
Right, the FCFTA. That's a big deal.
They believe that stronger economic ties with their African neighbors will be mutually beneficial.
Boosting trade, attracting investment, all of that.
Absolutely. It's about positioning Ghana as a gateway to the continent.
So it's very strategic and interconnected vision.
Exactly. And don't forget Ghana's history of peacekeeping efforts. They're very proud of that. They're committed to multilateralism, international cooperation.
It's like they're saying a strong and prosperous Ghana is good for everyone.
Exactly. A rising tide lifts all boats.
I like that. Well, it seems like we've reached the end of our deep dive into the NDC's 2024 manifesto. We've covered a lot of ground.
From resetting the economy to strengthening governance to solidifying their place on the world stage, it's a bold vision.
Full of ambition. It's important to remember, of course, that this is just one party's perspective, their vision for Ghana's future.
Right, it's a roadmap, a set of ideas.
Ultimately, it's up to the Ghanaian people to decide which path they want to take. But regardless of your political affiliation, I think it's crucial to engage with these ideas, to ask critical questions, to stay informed. And that's what we've tried to do today, give you the information and insights you need to participate in this crucial conversation about the future of Ghana. So we're turning it over to you now. What resonated with you? What are your hopes for Ghana? Keep the conversation going. And together, let's all work towards a brighter future for this incredible nation.